deliver a speech because I don't have one.
Good. Let's see. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You know what I was thinking about you coming? I thought you couldn't have dragged your predecessor here in his pickup truck. Why are you here?
We will have a listen of Danielle Smith talking about batteries and the reality that the government and federally doesn't understand. Welcome to Canada-Wide News. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into this.
Well, you know, I have to tell you, maybe people don't know this, but I started, my very first project that I wrote was environmental indicators for Canada and the United States. So I began my career in public policy on the environmental side, on the conservation side. My first advocacy job was landowner advocacy for the Canadian Property Rights Research Institute, where I learned a little bit, so that's where I first learned about the problem that we had of orphan and inactive wells and what we needed to do about it. And then when I worked at the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, I also authored an environmental survey on attitudes that business have. They don't believe that there is a choice that you make between the economy and the environment. They believe you could do both. So I would say that this strain of doing research on how do energy and environment intersect has really been the foundation of my public policy career. We don't always agree. I don't always agree with Chris, but I always love talking to him to get his perspective.
Excellent. Well, as you'll see, suddenly you draw a crowd, and isn't that great? We have lots to talk about and not loads of time. So, a net zero by 2050, we have the grid to talk about, we have the renewable pause to talk about, we have peak oil, when is it ever going to happen, if at all, and COP to talk about. We have 5 things. Anything you want to start with?
Well, let me talk about net zero by 2050, because when I first heard that Europe was moving in that direction, I thought, we can do that. And so I spent quite a bit of time with with various conservative think tanks and conservative groups to try to get that message out about let's embrace this challenge. Because one of the things conservatives have always said is that we have to wait for the technology to develop. We have to wait for innovation to happen. We have to let this be industry-led. And what I was observing is that industry was leading. In the past 5 years, for instance, you can look at the Pathways Project, which developed a very ambitious plan to be net zero by 2050. You can look at the petrochemical incentive program that we put in place that has attracted Air Products, a net zero hydrogen facility. Dow Chemical is nearing the end of making its final investment decision on a net zero petrochemical project. Heidelberg intends to have a net zero cement plant in Edmonton next year. And so it seemed to me that we needed to bring our policy in alignment with where industry was and then work with the federal government to try to align around what the pathway would be to 2050. We're not having perfect success on that. We are having some success. It's not all a fight, but I think that we're at least heading in the right direction.
There are folks in here who run businesses, and I do not know of a business that has a 27-year business plan. I actually don't know very many businesses that have a 5-year business plan. So I would like to ask you, when the emissions reduction energy development plan came out, it was positioned 6 months ago as a work in progress. How's progress? What can people look forward to happening this week, next week, and in the next 6 months?
Well, I guess I look at it a little bit differently. I think that, in fact, businesses do have a 20 and 40 and 60 and 100-year time frame. I know that, for instance, PV Mart does. They have a 100-year plan for where they want to be 100 years from now. I think what happens is that politicians have a 4-year time frame. And so politicians want to accelerate decision-making so that they can stand at podiums and have election wins, whether or not it's practical and realistic. And I've been watching this, as I mentioned. I've been following the COP discussions since the Kyoto in 1997, and I observed it happen over and over again. Politicians go out and they make these grand targets for what emissions reduction they're going to achieve, and then they don't achieve it.
Those targets have never met ever in the history of time. And we're going to have a listen to Stephen Guilbeault, how he's bragging that emissions went down 9% in 2020. And can anyone think in 2020 what happened? Why emissions in Canada would go down? And he's taking credit for it. And he never apologized for this misinformation that he spread. Let's have a listen to Stephen Guilbeault here.
This gives me the opportunity to talk about the fact that our carbon tax is one of the most effective in the world because it will reduce greenhouse gases, which went down by 9%, unlike what we heard on the other side of this House. And 100% of revenues generated by the carbon tax are returned to the provinces. 90% of households and 10% of municipalities and Indigenous communities. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Liberals have missed every single emissions target they've set since they put it in.
And so at the next COP meeting, they set new ambitious emissions reductions targets, and then they don't achieve them. And I guess I've taken a bit of a different view. I believe 2050 is achievable. I think that aligns us with most of our trading partners. Europe is on board with that. South Africa is as well. China, incidentally, wants to go to 2060. India wants to go to 2070. So I think that 2050 is realistic. And I think that you have to make sure that you are in sync with what is practical, what is achievable. There's not much point in putting forward a target that is unachievable and then being angry when it doesn't get achieved. Why don't we put forward a target that is reasonable? So I can tell you why 2030 is not achievable.
And Stephen Guilbeault is the prime example of this, how he predicts, and he's been around for 30 years doing this in his professional field. You set the target, it never is achieved. You just set new targets and everything's okay. Go fly in your plane, go all over the world, and talk about how we should just give more money to other countries in Canada while everyone in Canada starts just paying more and more and more. And let's keep going with this video.
Because everybody is kind of geared around how are we going to make massive emissions reductions by 2030. So part of the reason for our province, why it's difficult, is because we've already had a massive emissions reduction that came from the conversion from coal to natural gas. We have a brand new gas fleet. They have when businesses make that kind of investment, they expect to have a time horizon for capital that is going to allow them to pay it back. It is typically around 40 years. And so that's part of the difficulty that we have now, is now the rules have changed and they want to add additional costs associated with that to get to net zero by 2035 on the power grid.
But even still, what are we doing in the next 6 months?
In the next, I can't build a carbon capture pipeline in 6 months. I can't roll out small modular nuclear in 6 months. I can't create direct air capture at 100 different sites in 6 months. That's what I'm saying, is that I believe 2050 is achievable because we will do all of those things. When I look at the Pathways project, for instance, it involves getting the agreement between federal and provincial government on investment tax credit that will create the incentive for them to build that carbon trunk line. Now, how long do you think it'll take to build a brand new pipeline down the eastern part of the province that I think is going to be 200 or 300 kilometers? That can't be done overnight. That's probably a several-year project. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is waiting for the Darlington small modular nuclear to roll out. I think New Brunswick is on track for 2026 with theirs. It's quite small. I think that Darlington's on track for 2028, and we have signed on to an MOU with our partners once that technology is there for us to work on rolling it out. In fact, we have a $7 million research grant that we gave to Synovus about how we might deploy that. But that can't be done in 6 months, and it can't be done before 2030. And then the last piece is direct air capture, which I am very excited about because we have an innovative company called Avatar Innovations. They have 2 finalists in the Carbon X Prize that Elon Musk has put up for $100 million. We've already had an early success. Carbon Engineering was bought for $1.2 billion by Occidental Petroleum, and they have 100 sites that they're intending to roll it out. But none of that can happen in 6 months or by 2030. A lot of that might be 2030.
Sure.
Might be 2040, might be 2045. That's why we have to have the longer time horizon.
The projects take a long time, but things can happen. Policy can happen today. Encouragement can happen today. Funding can happen today. And I think a lot of folks in the room are curious about, deadlines or not, what are we actually doing now? What is happening now in the government level?
There's a number of things. I mean, I think that one of the things that we are not given enough credit for is that we have always been a leader on environmental policy. We have had successive climate plans. I think we've written 5 climate plans over the tenure of government through different administrations. We were the first to invest a massive amount in carbon capture utilization and storage. I didn't agree agree with the approach at the time, but it turned out to be quite visionary to have invested a substantial amount of money with Shell Quest so that we actually have at-scale projects that are now sequestering CO2, 10 megatons. We also phased out coal to natural gas, which has resulted in a massive reduction in emissions there. We set a target for methane emissions reductions to be 45% down from 2014 levels by 2025. We've achieved that, so we have to set a new one. We were the first to do industrial pricing of carbon through what is now our TIER program. TIER has just been approved last year by the federal government as being in sync with their proposals. So we've also started the hydrogen hub. I was just in Edmonton yesterday launching their new hydrogen buses. So Edmonton has one on the road and Strathcona County has one on the road. And they have an intention in the Edmonton region to be the hydrogen hub. We've been supporting that through Emissions Reduction Alberta. We've been supporting that through Innovate Alberta. We are supporting, along with the federal government, the conversion of long-haul vehicles so that they can either be dual fuel or full hydrogen, so that we can build this hydrogen highway starting between Calgary and Edmonton for long-haul vehicles, and seeing how we might be able to roll that out further. The Edmonton International Airport bought 100 Toyota Mirai. I got a chance to drive a hydrogen vehicle last summer. They're very zippy, and the economics on it seem to make sense. I mean, the Mirai sells for about 40 to 70,000, which is kind of what it is for a car these days. It's 5 kilograms to be able to fill up, which costs about $40 to $50, and it goes about 700 kilometers. So we're now at a point where I think that is going to be a massive new driver for how we're developing our technology here and how we're developing a cleaner transportation grid too.
In the world of, and I should, and folks know this.
Can I just say one more? I mean,
but again, the concern is it's not about what are the projects, it's what is the government doing. There's a lot of great projects going on, but what can you say? All right, this is what we're doing and what we plan, I think, is the question.
Well, I guess the reason I mention all of those is that government has had a part in being a catalyst for all of them, that we are helping to support hundreds of different projects, because in the world of innovation, you never know which one is going to be the one that succeeds. Look at, for instance, yesterday, Ever Technology. So it's a geothermal company that just got an award in Germany. We've supported them, but the federal government just put $90 million in for them to be able to accelerate. So that's the thing, is that it's incremental changes on incremental technology that add up to a major reduction in emissions. So if you're wondering what we're doing now, that's what we're doing now, and all of those things are going to lend themselves to major emissions reduction and ultimately achieving net zero by 2050.
Welcome back to Canada-Wide News. And hey, quick sidebar. I've noticed a bunch of you are lurking in the shadows, uncommitted to my subscriber list. With Trudeau eyeing the internet like it's his personal playground, subscribing is your ticket to never missing the show. I'll keep you in the loop with all the updates. As always, your opinions matter, so drop your thoughts in the comments below. Now smash that like and subscribe for more impactful stories. Your engagement really changes the game.